The desert before sunrise was a place where secrets breathed freely. Matthew Collins rode alone through the pale hush of dawn, his horse's hooves pressing soft warnings into the sand. He had learned long ago that the Wild West rewarded men who kept moving and punished those who lingered. Yet that morning something stopped him. 5 women stood by the river's edge. Apache sisters, unarmed, their posture calm but unyielding, as if the land itself had placed them there. They did not ask for help. They did not run. The eldest stepped forward, her voice steady, carrying neither fear nor invitation, only truth. "We have never slept with a man before." The words struck Matthew harder than a drawn gun. In a land ruled by rumor, violence, and misunderstanding, innocence was a dangerous thing to confess. He sensed at once that this was not a moment of chance, but a crossroads, one where a single choice could bind strangers together and awaken consequences no one could control. Because in the Wild West, some promises were heavier than bullets, and some silences could destroy entire lives. Before we step deeper into this story, take a moment to share where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. And if you enjoy cinematic Wild West stories filled with emotion, mystery, and quiet strength, please consider subscribing to the channel so you won't miss what happens next. Matthew Collins did not reach for his gun. That alone surprised him. Years on the frontier had trained his body to react before his mind could catch up, especially when standing face to face with Apache strangers in open land. Yet his hand remained loose at his side, fingers dusty relaxed. The 5 women before him stood close together, not huddled in fear, but arranged like roots of the same tree, separate, yet bound. The river whispered behind them, narrow and slow, reflecting the early light like a blade dulled by time. Matthew studied them carefully the way a man learns to read weather before a storm. Their clothes were worn but clean, their feet bare, toughened by long miles. No weapons, no horses, no signs of haste, only exhaustion pressed deep into their shoulders and eyes. Runaways, he thought, or survivors. The eldest, Ayanna, though he did not yet know her name, held his gaze without challenge. Her face bore lines of responsibility, not age. She had the look of someone who had already made every hard decision life demanded and was prepared to make more. "You should go," Matthew said at last, his voice low, steady. "This land isn't kind to misunderstandings." Ayanna did not answer immediately. When she did, her words were chosen with care, shaped slowly, as if each one mattered. "We cannot," she said. The others shifted slightly. One tall, broad-shouldered, watched him with a hardness that felt earned, not hostile. Another, smaller, younger, peeked at him with open curiosity before lowering her eyes again. One woman kept her gaze on the horizon, listening to something Matthew could not hear. "What are you running from?" he asked. Silence followed. It stretched long enough for Matthew to regret the question, long enough for the sun to crest higher and burn away the cool mercy of dawn. He had asked because he already knew the answer. People only stood like this, unmoving, unarmed, unafraid, when they had nowhere left to go. Ayanna's eyes flicked briefly toward the hills to the east. Not fear. Calculation. "We left," she said. "That is all." Matthew exhaled slowly. Leaving meant exile. It meant death by hunger, by heat, by men less patient than he was. Apache women traveling alone rarely made it far. Everyone on the frontier knew that. "You'll need horses," he said. "Food, water." "We know," said the strong one, Kiona, though again he did not know her name yet. Her voice held a sharp edge, worn smooth by distrust. "We know what men say happens to women like us." Matthew felt the words settle heavy in his chest. "I'm not most men," he said, and immediately hated how hollow it sounded. Ayanna studied him again, deeper this time, as if peeling away layers. Whatever she saw made her nod once, not in agreement, but in acceptance. "We do not ask for protection," she said. "Only passage." "To where?" Another pause. "Anywhere," the youngest said softly. Her voice was like wind through dry grass. "Somewhere we are not already condemned." Matthew looked at her, then Tala. Her eyes were bright, unscarred by the world that had already carved itself into the others. She watched him with a mixture of hope and fear, the kind that unsettled men more than threats ever could. He turned away, staring at the water. He should leave. He knew it. Every instinct whispered that this was trouble, the kind that followed a man into shallow graves or deeper regrets. He had buried enough of both. But another memory surfaced, unwanted. A woman kneeling in dust years ago, hands shaking, asking for help he had not been able to give. He swallowed. "There's a town west of here," he said. 2 days' ride. Folks there don't take kindly to strangers, especially not Apache. Kiona's mouth tightened. We know towns like that. Then you'll need someone to speak for you. Ayanna did not answer. Instead, she stepped closer, close enough for Matthew to smell river water and sage on her skin. Her voice dropped. You do not owe us anything, Matthew Collins. His head snapped up. How do you know my name? Ayanna's gaze did not waver. The land remembers. It was nonsense, and yet something in her tone made the hair on his arms lift. We saw your tracks yesterday, said the quiet one at last, Nokomis. She had spoken so softly Matthew hadn't realized she was listening at all. You circle danger. You do not run toward it. That struck too close. Matthew laughed once dry. You're wrong about that. Ayanna tilted her head. Then you will leave us. He looked from one face to the next. 5 women, 5 lives balanced on a moment that would never come again. No, he said finally. I won't. The relief on Tala's face was immediate. Kiona's suspicion did not fade, but it softened just slightly. Elu, the gentle one, closed her eyes as if whispering thanks to something unseen. Ayanna only nodded. We will walk behind you, she said. You lead. Matthew mounted his horse slowly. As he turned west, he felt the weight of their footsteps fall into rhythm with his own path. It was an unfamiliar sensation being followed not by fear or greed, but by trust. They traveled in silence for most of the morning. The land stretched open and merciless, the sun climbing higher with each hour. Matthew rationed water, carefully offering the women sips from his canteen without comment. They accepted without gratitude as equals, not dependents. Near midday, they stopped beneath the shade of a lone cottonwood. Matthew dismounted, checking the horizon. No riders, no dust trails. For now, Ayanna approached him. There is something you should understand, she said. About what I said by the river. Matthew met her eyes. I figured as much. It was not meant for you alone, she continued. It was truth, and truth once spoken cannot be gathered back. What does it mean? He asked. Her gaze drifted to her sister's. It means, she said quietly, that if the wrong man hears it, he will believe we belong to no one, and therefore to him. Matthew felt anger flare sharp and sudden. Not while I'm breathing, he said. Ayanna studied him again. Then, almost imperceptibly, she allowed herself the smallest smile. That was when Matthew understood. This was no longer a matter of escort or mercy. This was a crossing, and on the other side waited consequences he could not yet see. The wind shifted. Somewhere far off, a dog barked too close to be chance. Matthew reached for his rifle. We should move, he said. Behind him, 5 pairs of footsteps fell into line, and none of them knew how much bloodless violence a single sentence was about to unleash. They did not reach the town by nightfall. Matthew Collins chose that deliberately. Instead of riding straight west toward the promise of lanterns and false safety, he angled south, guiding them into a stretch of land most travelers avoided. The terrain there was rough, broken by shallow ravines and thorned scrub that tore at clothes and patience alike, but it was quiet. Quiet enough to hear one's own thoughts and to keep others from hearing you. They made camp as the sky bruised purple. Matthew built the fire small, careful to keep the smoke thin. The women moved with practiced efficiency, gathering stones, clearing brush, forming a circle that felt more ceremonial than necessary. When the flames finally caught, they sat opposite him, 5 silhouettes edged in amber light. No one spoke for a long time. The desert hummed with night sounds, crickets, the distant cry of something hunting. Matthew stirred the embers with a stick, buying himself time. He knew there was more to the story. He could feel it in the way Ayanna watched the darkness, in the way Nokomis listened, as if the wind might speak back. You said there was something I should understand, he said at last. About what you told me by the river. Ayanna did not answer immediately. She reached into a small bundle and withdrew a strip of worn leather, twisting it slowly between her fingers. Firelight traced the lines of her face, revealing fatigue she had not allowed herself to show. We did not leave because of hunger, she said, or war. Kiona's jaw tightened. We left because a lie was spoken, Ayanna continued, and once it was believed there was no path back. Matthew leaned forward, elbows on his knees. What kind of lie? A convenient one, Kiona said sharply. The kind men like to believe. Elu shifted closer to the fire. They said we were promised, she added softly. Given. To whom, Matthew asked. Not one man, Ayanna said. Many. The words settled like dust. Matthew had seen versions of this before. Girls traded to settle debts, women claimed to seal alliances. but 5 sisters at once. That was something else, something uglier. "And you refused," he said. Ayanna met his gaze. "We could not accept a future decided by men who feared our independence more than our defiance." Silence fell again, heavier now. Nokomis finally spoke, her voice low but steady. "Among our people there is a vow," she said. "It is made not to a man, but to oneself, to remain unclaimed until the heart chooses freely." Matthew nodded. "I've heard of it. Few outsiders understand it," Nokomis replied. "They hear only what suits them." Kiona's eyes flashed. "When my sister spoke those words aloud, when she said we had never slept with a man, it was not confession. It was declaration." "Of dignity," Elu said. "And danger," Tala whispered. Matthew stared into the fire, anger simmering behind his ribs. "So someone twisted it." "Yes," Ayanna said. "They told others we were untouched because no one wanted us, that we were free for the taking." Matthew's grip tightened on the stick until it snapped in half. "That kind of talk gets women killed," he said. Ayanna's expression did not change. "We know." For the first time since meeting them, Matthew felt the weight of fear, not for himself, but for what he had stepped into. He had agreed to lead them, thinking the danger lay ahead. Now he understood it had already begun. "And if this reaches the town," he asked. "It already has," Kiona said. "Words travel faster than horses." Matthew cursed under his breath. "Why tell me all this?" he asked. "Why trust me?" Ayanna considered him carefully. "Because you did not laugh," she said. "You did not leer. And when you warned us away, you did not point your gun." "That's a low bar," Matthew muttered. "It is the only one we have left," Tala said. The fire crackled, sending sparks upward like fleeting stars. Matthew leaned back, staring at the sky. "There's a man in that town," he said slowly. "Caleb Hargrove. Owns half the land west of the ridge. If he hears this story, he'll use it." Kiona's mouth curved into a grim smile. "He already has." That got his attention. "He sent riders," she continued. "They did not catch us." "How close?" Matthew asked. "Close enough," Nokomis said. Matthew stood pacing a few steps, then stopping. The night felt suddenly tighter, as if the land itself were leaning in to listen. "Sheriff Amos Ridley won't stop it," he said. "He'll claim his hands are tied." Ayanna rose as well, meeting him eye to eye. "Then the truth must be louder than the lie." Matthew shook his head. "Truth doesn't win in towns like that." "Then what does Tala?" asked. Matthew had no answer. They slept in shifts. Matthew took first watch, sitting with his rifle across his knees, eyes scanning the darkness. The women lay close together, backs to the fire, their breathing slow and even. They trusted him with their lives. That knowledge sat heavier than any weapon. Near midnight, Nokomis joined him. "You do not sleep much," she said. "Sleeping's a luxury," he replied. She studied his face, then nodded. "You carry loss." He stiffened. "Everyone does." "Yes," she agreed, "but not everyone listens to it." She returned to the others without another word. By dawn, Matthew had decided they would go to the town. Not because it was safe, but because hiding would only make the lie grow larger. As they packed up, Ayanna approached him once more. "You may still turn back," she said. "After today, your name will be tied to ours." Matthew slung his saddle over his horse. "My name's been tied to worse." Her eyes softened, not with gratitude, but respect. They reached the outskirts of the town by afternoon. Weathered buildings crouched beneath the sundust, drifting lazily between them. A few heads turned. A few whispers began. Matthew felt it immediately, the shift in the air. Curiosity sharpened by appetite. He dismounted, placing himself slightly ahead of the women, not in front of them, beside them. A man spat near the hitching post, another laughed. And, somewhere unseen, a door closed softly as if a decision had just been made. Matthew squared his shoulders. Whatever came next would not be gentle, and the truth they carried was about to demand its price. The town did not greet them with words. It greeted them with silence, the kind that measured strangers the way a butcher measured meat. Matthew Collins felt it the moment his boots touched the hard-packed dirt of the main street. Conversations faded. Doors creaked shut. Curtains shifted. The sound of the river behind them seemed suddenly very far away. He had walked into towns like this before. Plenty of them. He knew the rules: keep your hands visible, your voice calm, your back straight. Never look afraid. Never look proud. But this time was different. This time he was not alone. 5 Apache women walked beside him, their presence bending the air. They did not hunch their shoulders or hide their faces. Ayanna walked with her head high, her gaze steady. Kiona's eyes tracked every movement, every man who lingered too long. Nokomis listened not just to voices, but to pauses. Elu murmured something under her breath, a prayer or warning Matthew could not tell. Tala stayed close, her fingers brushing Ayanna's sleeve like a tether. Matthew felt the weight of it settle into his spine. This was what he had tried to outrun for years, the moment when standing still became a choice with consequences. A memory rose uninvited. Another town, another street, another silence. He had been younger, then leaner, less careful. He had believed the world could be reasoned with if a man just chose the right words. He remembered her standing in the doorway, Mary Ellen, sunlight in her hair, worry in her eyes. He remembered the way she had trusted him to fix what he could not yet see was already broken. "Don't go," she had said. "I'll be back before dark." He had answered. He never was. The memory tightened around his chest as a man stepped out from the saloon, thumbs hooked in his belt. His smile was slow, deliberate. "Well, now," the man drawled. "Looks like you brought company, Collins." Matthew recognized him, one of Caleb Hargrove's hands. That much was obvious by the brand stitched into his vest. Passing through, Matthew said. The man's eyes slid past him, lingering on the women. "Shame," he replied. "Boss likes to know who's passing through his land." "This isn't his land," Matthew said. The man chuckled. "Depends who you ask." Matthew felt Kiona stiffen beside him. "Where's the sheriff?" Matthew asked. "Asleep," the man said. "Or pretending to be." That figured. Matthew moved on, guiding the group toward the old livery at the edge of town. Each step felt heavier than the last. The whispers followed them like flies. Inside the livery, the air was cooler. Dust motes hung suspended in beams of light. Matthew closed the door behind them, leaning against it for a moment longer than necessary. "That was not wise," Kiona said quietly. "No," Matthew agreed, "but it was necessary." Ayanna watched him closely. "You have been here before." "Yes," he said. "And something bad happened," she added. He met her gaze, then looked away. "There was a woman," he said after a long pause. "She trusted the wrong men. Trusted me to keep her safe." Elu's expression softened. "I went to fetch help," Matthew continued. "Thought I had time. Thought I understood the danger." His voice roughened. "I didn't." The livery creaked as someone shifted outside. "She died because I believed the town would do the right thing," he said. "I haven't believed that since." Silence filled the space again, but this time it was not judging. It was listening. Ayanna stepped closer, not touching him, but near enough that he felt the warmth of her presence. "You stayed," she said. "This time." Matthew exhaled. "I don't know if that's bravery or guilt." Sometimes, Nokomis said from the shadows, "They wear the same face." A commotion sounded outside, raised voices, the scrape of boots. Matthew straightened, instinct snapping him back to the present. "That'll be Ridley," he said. "Or Hargrove." "Which is worse?" Tala asked. Matthew did not answer. The door swung open. Sheriff Amos Ridley stood there, hat in hand, eyes tired. He took in the scene slowly, his gaze flicking from Matthew to the women and back again. "You make it hard to ignore you, Collins," he said. "That wasn't the plan," Matthew replied. Ridley sighed. "I hear things." "So do I," Matthew said. "Question is what you're going to do about them." Ridley's jaw tightened. "You know how this town works." "Yes," Matthew said. "That's why I'm worried." Ridley looked at the women, his expression unreadable. "You're stirring up trouble," he said finally. "No," Ayanna said calmly. "The trouble was already here." Ridley flinched, just slightly. "There are men who believe you owe them something," he said. "Men with power." Ayanna's voice did not waver. "We owe no one our bodies. Or our silence." Matthew watched Ridley carefully. He saw it then, the fear beneath the badge. Fear of Hargrove. Fear of losing what little order he still controlled. "I can keep things quiet for a night," Ridley said. "Maybe two." "That's not enough," Matthew replied. Ridley met his eyes. "It's all I have." When the sheriff left, the livery felt smaller. Matthew ran a hand through his hair. "We'll move again at first light," he said. "And if they follow," Kiona asked. "Then we don't run," Matthew replied. Ayanna studied him, seeing something shift. "You are not the man you were," she said. Maybe Matthew answered, "But I'm still paying for him." That night, Matthew did not sleep. He sat near the door, listening to the town breathe. Laughter drifted from the saloon, rough and careless. Somewhere, a woman cried softly before the sound was cut short. Matthew closed his eyes. He had tried to outrun his past across deserts and mountains. He had believed distance could dull regret. But standing there guarding 5 women whose courage put his own to shame, he understood the truth. The past was not a place you left behind. It was something you faced, or it followed you forever. Outside footsteps approached. Slow, deliberate. Matthew's hand tightened on his rifle. The reckoning he had feared for years was no longer behind him. It was knocking at the door. The knock never came. Instead, the footsteps outside the livery paused long enough for Matthew Collins to count 3 slow breaths, then retreated. Whoever had been there wanted him to know they could approach without fear. That knowledge lingered like a bad taste. Dawn arrived thin and gray. Matthew rose before the light fully took shape, easing the door open to a street that pretended nothing had happened. The town wore its morning face, a woman sweeping dust from her stoop, a boy hauling water, a mule braying somewhere behind a fence. Ordinary sounds, ordinary lies. He closed the door quietly and turned to the women. "We move carefully today," he said. "Eyes open, say nothing, unless you have to." Kiona gave a sharp nod. Nokomis inclined her head, already listening. Elu touched Tala's shoulder, grounding her. Ayana met Matthew's gaze, reading the tension he could not hide. "They are watching," she said. "Yes," he replied. "And waiting." They stepped out together. The main street seemed wider in daylight, the spaces between buildings more exposed. Matthew positioned himself slightly to the side, not shielding the women, but marking the boundary of respect. He could feel eyes on his back, on their hair, on their bare feet. He could hear the low murmurs begin again, thin as spider silk and just as sticky. Those them thought they'd be younger. Shame. Waste. Matthew kept walking. They reached the mercantile, the only place to buy supplies without a question asked, usually. The proprietor, a narrow man with careful eyes, froze when he saw who Matthew had brought. "I need flour," Matthew said. "Dried meat. Coffee." The man glanced at the women. "For you, for all of us," Matthew said evenly. The man's mouth tightened. "You payin'?" Matthew set coins on the counter. The clink sounded too loud. The man hesitated, then took them. He moved slowly, deliberately, as if each scoop of flour weighed a moral decision. When he slid the goods across the counter, his eyes did not meet Matthew's. Outside, a wagon creaked past. A group of men leaned near the saloon laughter, cutting off when the door opened. One of them, tall, well-fed, confident, lifted his chin in greeting. Caleb Hargrove. Matthew felt the temperature drop inside his chest. Hargrove crossed the street with the easy stride of a man who owned outcomes. His coat was clean, his boots polished. He stopped a few paces away, smiling as if he'd stumbled upon a pleasant surprise. "Matthew Collins," he said. "Didn't expect to see you back in town." "Didn't plan on it," Matthew replied. Hargrove's gaze slid past him, lingering openly now. "And these must be the ladies I've been hearing about." Ayana met his eyes without blinking. "Careful," Matthew said. "You're standing close." Hargrove chuckled. "You always were touchy about manners. I admire that." He turned to Ayana. "I hear you said something interesting. By the river." Ayana did not answer. That silence, Hargrove continued, it lets a man's imagination work. Dangerous thing, imagination. Matthew felt his jaw set. "You heard wrong." "Oh, I doubt that." Hargrove's smile thinned. "See, words don't change much once they've been loosed. They just find better ears." He stepped back, spreading his hands. "Sheriff Ridley's trying to keep the peace. Bless his heart. But this town's got questions. And you're offering answers," Matthew said. "I'm offering solutions," Hargrove replied. "Housing, work, protection. For women with limited options." Kiona's breath hissed between her teeth. Ayana spoke, then her voice calm and clear. "We require none of that." Hargrove's eyes sharpened. "Everyone requires something." Matthew stepped forward. "They're under my protection." A murmur rippled from the saloon porch. Hargrove raised an eyebrow. "Protection is expensive." "I'll pay," Matthew said. Hargrove laughed softly. "Careful, Collins. You're already in debt to this place." The sheriff appeared, then moving fast, hat pulled low. Amos Ridley stopped between them, his posture stiff. "That's enough," Ridley said. "All of it." Hargrove sighed theatrically. "Just talking." "Do it somewhere else," Ridley replied. Hargrove's gaze flicked to the women one last time. "We'll talk again," he said to Matthew, or to the town. It was hard to tell. Then he turned away. The street exhaled. Ridley rubbed his face. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. There's no easy way to do the right thing," Matthew said. Ridley looked at Ayana. "You need to leave?" "We intend to," she replied. After we are heard. Ridley's shoulders sagged. That's not how it works. That is how it must, Nokomis said quietly. Ridley glanced at Matthew. One night, he said. That's all I can promise. That's all we'll take. Matthew replied. They returned to the livery under the weight of 1,000 unspoken thoughts. Inside, Matthew set the supplies down and barred the door. The space felt smaller now, not because of fear, but because of attention. They will come, Kiona said. Yes, Matthew answered, but not like last time. Ayana studied him. You are preparing for something. I'm preparing to tell the truth, he said. And if they don't want it, Tala asked. Matthew looked at her, seeing the edge of adulthood sharpened by necessity. Then we make them listen. As evening fell, voices gathered outside, not shouting yet. The sound of boots, the scrape of chairs, the town settling in to witness something it had already decided the ending of. Matthew cleaned his rifle with steady hands. He did not intend to use it, but he would not be caught unready. Ayana stood beside him. You could still walk away, she said. He met her gaze. So could you. We will not, she said. Neither would he. Outside, someone struck a match. Light flared. A voice called out, pleasant, inviting. Time to talk Collins. Matthew rose. Whatever was coming next would not be resolved by silence, and the town, hungry for spectacle, had gathered to feed. He opened the door. The crowd outside the livery had learned how to stand without appearing to threaten. That was the most dangerous kind. Matthew Collins stepped into the lantern glow and felt the air tighten as if the town itself had drawn a breath and refused to let it go. Men clustered in loose knots. A few women lingered at the edges, arms crossed, eyes sharp with judgment or worry. It was hard to tell which. The match that had been struck earlier burned down to a trembling ember, then died. Evening, Matthew, a voice called out. Pleasant, familiar, didn't mean to disturb your rest. Matthew recognized it, Jed Turner, a man who never took a side until it was clear which one paid better. You didn't, Matthew said. Say what you came to say. Jed smiled, spreading his hands. Just talk is all. Folks got questions. That's usually how it starts, Matthew replied. A ripple of uneasy laughter followed. Someone shifted. Someone else spat. From behind Matthew, the door opened softly. The women stepped out together, not as a shield, not as bait, simply present. Ayana's face was calm, her posture steady. Kiona's eyes scanned the crowd like a ledger of debts. Nokomis listened to the silence between breaths. Elu held Tala's hand, grounding them both. The murmurs grew. There they are. Heard they said shameful if it's true, or brave someone whispered too quietly to be owned. Jed cleared his throat. We're a decent town, he said. We don't want trouble. Then stop inviting it, Matthew said. Jed's smile thinned. There's talk. About what was said, about what's owed. Ayana took a step forward. Nothing is owed, she said clearly. Not to you, not to any man. The words landed with a dull thud, like a shovel hitting packed earth. Jed's eyes flicked to Caleb Hargrove, who stood just behind the first ring of men, hands clasped, expression indulgent. Hargrove nodded once, permission or instruction. Well, Jed said, voice tightening, that ain't how some folks see it. Matthew felt the old familiar heat rise, anger sharpened by memory. He stepped between Ayana and the crowd, not blocking her voice but marking the line. Say what you mean, he said. Out loud. A man laughed. Another joined in. The sound spread thin and brittle. They say you're untouched, a voice called from the back. That you're free. Free for what? Ayana asked. Silence answered her. That was answer enough. Matthew's hand curled into a fist. You hear yourselves, he said. You're turning a vow into an invitation. Hargrove finally stepped forward. Easy now, he said, voice smooth as oil. No one's accusing anyone of anything. We're just concerned about our virtue, Kiona snapped. Or your opportunity. Hargrove smiled at her. Opportunity's just another word for timing. That's enough, Sheriff Ridley said, pushing through the crowd. His voice carried authority that felt borrowed. This isn't a trial. No, Hargrove agreed. Just a conversation. Ridley's jaw tightened. Conversations end when they stop being civil. A man near the saloon leaned forward. What if they're lying? Ayana met his gaze. Then judge us by our actions, she said. Not your fantasies. The man flushed. You come into our town, say things like that, and you think that gives you rights? Matthew finished. You want to talk law. There's none that says a woman's worth is measured by your desire. Hargrove chuckled softly. You always did talk like a preacher, Collins. I've buried the cost of silence, Matthew replied. I won't do it again. The crowd shifted. Unease spread like a stain. Jed swallowed. Maybe we should all cool off. Good idea, Ridley said quickly. Everyone go home. No one moved. Ayanna took another step forward, her voice rising not loud, but certain. We spoke truth among ourselves, she said. Truth meant to keep us whole. It was twisted by those who profit from breaking women into pieces. Her gaze found Hargrove. We will not carry your shame. Hargrove's smile disappeared. You're making a mistake, he said quietly. This town can be cruel. So can the desert, Ayanna replied. Yet it does not lie. A murmur ran through the women at the edges of the crowd. One of them, a seamstress, Matthew recognized, looked from Ayanna to Hargrove, then away unsettled. Hargrove inhaled slowly. Sheriff, he said, I think these women need protection. Ridley stared at him. From what Hargrove's eyes flicked to the men around him. From misunderstanding. Matthew felt the trap spring. You touch them, he said, voice low and dangerous, and I will not misunderstand your intentions. The crowd reacted, then some with shock, some with excitement. The hunger for spectacle sharpened. Ridley raised his hands. Enough, all of you! A stone clattered to the ground near Matthew's boot. No one claimed it. That was the moment Matthew knew the rumor had finished its work. Words had become weapons. Curiosity had curdled into permission. Ayanna leaned close, her voice barely audible. They are deciding what we are. Matthew nodded. Then we decide who we stand with. He turned to the crowd. Listen to me, he said louder now. You think this is about them. It's not. It's about what kind of town you want to be when the dust settles. A woman spoke up, hesitant but clear. Leave them be. Heads turned. Another voice followed. Ain't right. Hargrove's eyes narrowed. Ridley seized the opening. That's it, he said. This gathering's over. Anyone causing trouble spends the night in my cell. The crowd hesitated, then reluctantly began to break apart. Not all of them. Enough. Hargrove stepped back, his smile returning thinner than before. Another time, he said to Matthew, Truth has a way of bending. Matthew watched him go, knowing this was far from over. As the street emptied, Ayanna exhaled. They will not forget, no, Matthew said, and neither will we. They retreated into the livery, barring the door once more. The women sat together, the tension finally finding a place to rest. Tala looked up at Matthew. Is it always like this? He considered the question. It doesn't have to be, he said, but it is when good people wait too long to speak. Outside, a chair scraped. Laughter rose again, forced brittle. Matthew checked the window, then turned back to the women. We've crossed a line tonight, he said. There's no pretending after this. Ayanna met his gaze, steady as ever. We did not come to pretend. Matthew nodded. He could feel the town's eyes still on them, could feel the rumor tightening like rope, patient, persistent. Tomorrow it would demand more than words. And the night, thick with consequence, pressed in. Morning in the livery arrived without comfort. The light that slipped through the cracks in the wooden walls carried dust, not warmth. It revealed everything Matthew Collins had tried to ignore the night before the women's fatigue. The tension in their shoulders, the quiet way Tala's fingers worried the hem of her sleeve, as if she could unravel fear thread by thread. Matthew had hoped the town's hunger would cool with sleep. Instead, it sharpened. He heard it outside, boots on boards, low voices that stopped the moment he moved near a window. He smelled it too, the sour mix of liquor and certainty, the kind of certainty that turned decent men into wolves without ever making them admit they'd changed. Ayanna stood near the stall door, watching the narrow strip of street visible through a gap. Her posture was still, but Matthew saw the way her breathing had slowed into control. You did not sleep, he said. Neither did you, she replied without looking away. Matthew poured water into a tin cup and offered it. Ayanna accepted, took a small sip, then passed it to Tala, first an instinct that spoke louder than affection. The sisters moved like one body. Kiona, checking the door's bar, Nokomis listening at the wall, Elu tying a strip of cloth around Tala's wrist, something simple, grounding like a promise you could touch. Matthew watched them and felt something unfamiliar tighten in his throat. Not desire, respect. We need to talk, he said, before we step out again. Kiona's eyes narrowed. Talk is what got us here. No, Matthew corrected gently. A lie is what got you here. And if we're going to fight it, I need to understand the truth the way you do. Ayanna turned, then facing him fully. Understanding does not always protect you, she said. I'm already in it, Matthew replied. Protection isn't the point. Silence lingered. Then Nokomis nodded once. Tell him, she said to Ayanna, the whole shape of it. Ayanna's gaze drifted to her sisters. Something passed between them, an unspoken agreement, heavy and tender. We were raised with rules, Ayanna began. Rules that kept us safe. Not from the world, but from ourselves. Matthew sat on a feed crate, elbows on his knees, listening. In our family, Ayanna continued, there is an oath women can choose. Not all do, but those who do it for a reason. Elu spoke next, voice soft. It is not about being pure for a man, she said. It is about being whole for yourself. Kiona's mouth tightened. Men hear the word untouched and think it means empty, she said. Like land with no fence, like a thing waiting for ownership. That is not what it means, Nokomis added. It means unclaimed by force, unbroken by fear. Matthew felt heat rise behind his eyes, not tears, but the sting of truth. He had grown up in a world where a woman's worth was traded in whispers and weddings where men praised restraint but demanded surrender. He had never questioned the shape of those expectations because no one had asked him to. Then why say it aloud, he asked quietly. By the river, to me. Ayanna's eyes hardened. Because we needed to know what kind of man you were. Matthew swallowed. That was the test. It was the door, Ayanna said. Some men hear those words and step through as if invited. Tala's voice trembled. We've seen it. Matthew looked at her, at the fear she was trying to hold back. What happened? Ayanna's jaw tightened. For a moment, Matthew thought she might refuse. Then she spoke, and her voice carried the weight of memory. There was a traitor, she said, a man with sweet speech and hands that never stayed where they belonged. He came to our camp with cloth and tools and promises of peace. He looked at us like we were prizes. Kiona's hands clenched. He tried to take Tala. Tala's breath hitched. Elu squeezed her hand. Matthew felt something cold settle in his stomach. Did he? No, Ayanna said, cutting him off. Because we stopped him, but the lie began then. He left angry, humiliated, and he spoke to men who wanted an excuse. Nokomis leaned forward. Words like smoke, she said. Once they rise, you cannot gather them. Matthew exhaled slowly. And those men were connected to Hargrove. Yes, Kiona said. He feeds on stories. He turns them into chains. Matthew stared at the dusty floorboards. He understood now why the rumor had spread so fast, why it fit so neatly into the town's expectations. It gave men permission without requiring them to admit they wanted it. Ayanna stepped closer. You are thinking like a man of this town, she said. Matthew looked up sharply. What's that supposed to mean? It means, Ayanna said, voice steady, you are trying to solve this with logic, with words. But this is not a puzzle. It is hunger. Matthew's jaw worked. He hated that she was right. So what do we do? He asked. If truth isn't enough, Nokomis answered softly, then truth must be seen. Kiona nodded. We do not beg, she said. We stand. Matthew's chest tightened. Stand where Ayanna's gaze went to the door. Where everyone can witness what kind of men they are choosing to be. Matthew stood slowly, feeling the old fear rise, the fear of repeating his past. Mary Ellen's face flashed before him. Her trust. His failure. He had sworn never again. Outside a shout rose someone calling Ridley's name. Another voice laughed. The sound of a bottle breaking followed like punctuation. Matthew moved to the narrow window and peered out. A handful of men lingered near the saloon, restless. Not drunk yet, but ready. A wagon rolled by carrying hay, the driver staring too long. Across the street, a woman pulled her child closer and hurried away. This town was a tinderbox, and Hargrove Matthew suspected had been striking matches since the women arrived. We need, Ridley Matthew said. If he's gonna do anything, it has to be now. Ridley did not come when Matthew called, not at first. When he finally appeared mid-morning, he looked older than he had the day before. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw unshaven. He carried the kind of exhaustion that came from fighting battles you didn't believe you could win. Don't tell me you're still here, Ridley muttered as he stepped into the livery. We're still here, Matthew said evenly. Ridley's gaze flicked to the women. Hargrove stirring them up, he said. He wants you to make a mistake. I'm not here to fight, Matthew replied. Ridley gave a humorless laugh. No, you're here to be swallowed. Ayanna stepped forward. We want to speak, she said. In front of all. Ridley blinked. Speak. Yes, Nokomis said. So they cannot pretend they didn't hear. Ridley rubbed his forehead. You don't understand. Once you do that, there's no walking back. Kiona's eyes flashed. There was no walking back the moment they decided we were property. Ridley looked at Matthew. You really planning to let them do this? Matthew hesitated just a heartbeat. He wanted to say no, to protect them by steering them away from the crowd, to keep the fire contained. But then he saw Ayanna's face. Not pleading, not relying on him. Choosing. I'm not letting them, Matthew said. They're choosing it. Ridley exhaled long and slow. You're going to get yourselves killed. Alu's voice was gentle. We have been living with that threat since we were girls. Ridley's gaze softened just slightly, as if a human part of him had been touched despite his fear. All right, he said at last. Noon, by the courthouse steps. But I swear to God, if Hargrove turns this ugly, he already has, Matthew said. Ridley left as quickly as he'd come, as if staying too long might make him complicit. Noon approached like a storm you could see from miles away. In the final hour, the women prepared in silence. Elu smoothed Tala's hair. Nokomis adjusted the worn leather at Ayanna's wrist. Kiona checked the bar again, then met Matthew's gaze, something like respect in her eyes, cautious but real. Ayanna stepped close to Matthew, her voice low. You cannot carry us like burdens, she said. I wasn't planning to, Matthew replied. Good, she said, because we are not burdens. Matthew nodded, feeling the truth of it settle into him. When they stepped out into the sun, the town was already gathering, and this time the lie would not be allowed to speak alone. By noon, the town had rearranged itself. Chairs appeared where there had been none that morning. Song. Men leaned against posts, as if they had always belonged there. Women stood in doorways, half-hidden curiosity tugging against caution. Children were shooed away, then crept back, drawn by the promise of something forbidden. Matthew Collins stood at the edge of the courthouse steps, the sun heavy on his shoulders. The building behind him was old, its wood cracked and faded its authority, more rumor than law. Sheriff Amos Ridley paced near the door, hat in hand, jaw clenched tight enough to ache. Across the square, Caleb Hargrove arrived with the ease of a man late on purpose. He dismounted slowly, handing his reins to one of his hands, who led the horse away with practiced obedience. Hargrove surveyed the gathering like a host inspecting his guests, nodding here, smiling there. He wore a pale vest and carried a cane he did not need. It was not weakness he was signaling, it was control. Matthew felt the familiar tightening in his chest. Ayanna and her sisters stood together, a few steps behind him. They had chosen their place carefully, not hidden, not elevated. Present, equal. Tala's fingers trembled once, then steadied as Elu brushed them lightly, keeping her anchored. Kiona's stance was wide and balanced. Nokomis's gaze moved slowly, reading faces the way other people read maps. Ridley cleared his throat. This is not a trial, he said loudly. It's an address. Anyone causes trouble. Hargrove raised a hand, smiling. Let's not start with threats, Sheriff. We're all neighbors here. Ridley bristled but said nothing. Hargrove turned to the crowd. Friends, he began, voice warm and measured. We've all heard stories the past few days, stories that don't sit right. Murmurs rippled outward. Now I don't pretend to know what's true, Hargrove continued. But when confusion spreads, it's a man's duty to restore order. Matthew took a step forward. Order isn't restored by lies. Hargrove's smile widened. Ah, Matthew Collins, ever the idealist. He turned slightly as if confiding in the crowd. Matthew here believes words don't have consequences. That's not what I said, Matthew replied. But you act like it, Hargrove said smoothly. You bring 5 women into our town, stir up talk, then act surprised when folks ask questions. Ayanna stepped forward. Her movement was unhurried, deliberate. We did not stir talk, she said, her voice carrying easily. We spoke truth among ourselves. Others twisted it. Hargrove inclined his head, and yet the words were spoken. Yes, Ayanna replied. And that frightened you. A few heads turned. A woman near the mercantile frowned, unsettled. Hargrove chuckled. You give me too much credit. You profit from fear, Kiona said sharply. You always have. Hargrove's eyes flicked to her, calculating. Strong words from someone with no standing here. Nokomis spoke, then her voice low but clear. Standing is not given, she said. It is taken. The crowd quieted. Hargrove sighed as if indulging children. Ladies, he said, no one wishes you harm. Quite the opposite. This town can offer protection, stability, a place. At what price? Ayanna asked. Hargrove spread his hands. Contribution. Matthew laughed, once harsh and humorless. You mean obedience? Hargrove's smile vanished. "Watch yourself." Ridley stepped forward. "That's enough." Hargrove ignored him. His gaze settled on Ayanna again. "You say you belong to no one," he said. "That's a dangerous thing to declare in a place built on claims." Ayanna held his gaze. "Then perhaps your place is built on theft." A collective intake of breath followed. Hargrove's jaw tightened. "You accuse me, I name what I see." Ayanna replied. Hargrove took a step closer. "You should be careful. Words can make enemies." Ayanna did not retreat. "We have lived with enemies since we learned to walk." Hargrove turned to the crowd, his voice hardening. "See, this is what I mean. Defiance. Disrespect. If this is allowed to stand what follows. Maybe honesty." A woman called from the edge. Hargrove's eyes snapped toward her. The woman shrank back, but she did not look away. Matthew felt a flicker of hope, small, fragile. Hargrove adjusted his vest. "Sheriff," he said, "I think it's clear these women are at risk. They need to be placed somewhere safe." Ridley's shoulders slumped. "You don't get to decide that." "Someone must," Hargrove replied, "before this gets ugly." The word hung heavy. Matthew saw it then, the shift. The way Hargrove's men began to move, subtle circling. The way curiosity in the crowd curdled into anticipation. This was the moment Hargrove wanted chaos, disguised as concern. Matthew stepped forward, voice ringing. "This ends now." Hargrove turned to him slowly. "Does it?" "Yes," Matthew said. "You've twisted their words into permission. I won't let you." "And how will you stop me?" Hargrove asked softly. Matthew did not reach for his rifle. He raised his voice instead. "These women spoke of a vow," he said. "A vow to choose their own lives. You heard it and saw profit. That says more about you than them." Hargrove's smile returned thin and sharp. "Careful, Collins. You're standing alone." Matthew glanced back. He was not. Ridley stood straighter. The seamstress from the night before stepped forward, her chin lifted. Another woman followed, then another. Not many. Enough. Ayanna watched it happen, eyes steady, unblinking. Hargrove's gaze swept the crowd, irritation flashing beneath his calm. "You want to turn this town against itself?" he asked. "Against injustice," Matthew replied. Hargrove's voice dropped. "You forget who holds the deeds. And you forget," Ayanna said quietly, "that land remembers who bled for it." Something flickered across Hargrove's face. Anger, yes, but also something else. Uncertainty. Ridley seized the moment. "This gathering is over," he said loudly. "Anyone who stays will answer to me." Hargrove looked at him, incredulous. "You'll regret this." Ridley met his gaze. "Maybe, but not today." Hargrove held the stare a beat longer, then nodded. "Very well," he said. "Another time." He turned away, his men following the circle, loosening but not breaking. As the crowd began to disperse, Matthew exhaled slowly, his hands shaking now that the moment had passed. Ayanna stepped closer. "He will not stop," she said. "No," Matthew agreed. "He'll change tactics." Kiona's eyes narrowed. "What does that mean?" "It means," Matthew said, watching Hargrove's retreating back, "he'll try to take something from us quietly." Ayanna followed his gaze. "Then we do not give him the dark." The square emptied, leaving behind scuffed dirt and broken expectations. Ridley approached Matthew, voice low. "You made an enemy today." Matthew nodded. He already was. Ridley looked at the women. "You should leave town." Ayanna met his gaze. "Soon," she said. "But not yet." Ridley hesitated, then nodded once. "Be careful." As they returned to the livery, Matthew felt the weight of what had happened settle in. They had won nothing permanent. They had only delayed the inevitable. Inside, Ayanna turned to him. "You stood when you could have hidden," she said. Matthew rubbed his face. "I've done enough hiding for one lifetime." Outside, a door slammed. Somewhere a voice laughed, too loud, too sharp. Matthew checked the window again. Hargrove was gone, which meant he was planning. Night came without ceremony. The town did not sleep. It only pretended to. Lanterns glowed behind curtained windows, and the saloon breathed out laughter that rose and fell like a bad tide. Matthew Collins felt the eyes even when he could not see them, felt the attention coil and wait. He chose to leave the livery after dark, not to flee, but to breathe. The desert beyond the last row of buildings opened wide and quiet, a black bowl scattered with stars. Matthew led the women out through the rear, keeping to shadows, their steps soft on the dust. The air cooled quickly, and with it came the smell of sage and old stone, honest smells that asked nothing in return. They stopped near a low ridge where the town's lights thinned and the sky reclaimed itself. This is far enough, Matthew said. They stood in a loose circle, the night pressing close but not threatening. Arshrinink. Crickets stitched the silence together. Somewhere distant, an owl called once, then fell quiet. Ayana watched the stars as if reading a familiar script. The desert listens, she said softly. Matthew nodded. It keeps better counsel than most towns. Kiona scanned the horizon. We shouldn't linger. We won't, Matthew replied. I just wanted space. Elise sat folding her legs beneath her palms, resting open on her knees. Tala mirrored her eyes, bright reflecting starlight. Nokomis remained standing attentive, hearing what the night would offer. For a moment no one spoke. Matthew felt the urge to fill it, an old habit, but resisted. Silence had its own grammar out here. Ayana broke it at last. You put yourself in danger today. I've done that before, Matthew said. And it cost you, she replied, not unkindly. He considered the truth of that. Yes. She turned to face him fully. Then why do it again? The question was not an accusation. It was an invitation to speak honestly or not at all. Matthew took a breath. Because I recognized the lie he said, and because I knew what it would do if no one challenged it. Ayana waited. I once believed distance could make me clean, he continued, that if I kept moving, I wouldn't have to choose sides. I was wrong. The stars seemed to press closer. Ayana's gaze softened. Choice is heavier than movement, she said. Yes, Matthew replied. It is. Kiona shifted her weight. Words won't stop Hargrove, she said. He'll come another way. I know, Matthew said. That's why I brought you out here. Ayana's brow furrowed. What are you planning? Nothing dramatic, he said. Nothing that gives him the dark. But I need you to know something. He turned to them all. If you leave tonight, I'll ride with you as far as the ridge. I'll make sure you have water and a clean trail. Tala's eyes widened. Leave, yes, Matthew said gently. It's an option. Ayana studied him. And if we stay, then I stay, he said. No conditions, no ownership, just presence. The word hung between them. Kiona watched him carefully. Why would you do that? Matthew met her gaze. Because I promised myself I wouldn't walk away again. Elu smiled faintly as if hearing a truth settle into place. Nokomis inclined her head once. Ayana looked to her sisters, then back to Matthew. We will stay, she said. Matthew exhaled. All right. They stood together beneath the stars, the town's noise reduced to a distant hum. Matthew felt a strange calm, fragile, yes, but real. Ayana stepped closer, not touching him, but close enough that he could feel the warmth of her presence. There is something else, she said quietly. About the vow. Matthew waited. It is not broken by affection, she continued, nor by trust. It is broken by force. Matthew nodded. I understand. Do you? She asked, searching his face. He met her gaze steady. I do. And I won't cross what isn't mine to cross. Ayana's shoulders eased just a fraction. Then you hear us. Yes, Matthew said. They stood like that for a moment, two people choosing stillness in a world that rewarded haste. It was not romance in the way the saloon songs promised. It was something quieter, stronger. A recognition. A sound drifted from the direction of town, hoofbeats distant but purposeful. Kiona stiffened. They're moving. Matthew listened. The rhythm was wrong for a single rider. A patrol, he said, or a show. Nokomis tilted her head. Hargrove tests the fence, she murmured. Matthew looked toward the glow of lanterns. We head back, he said. Together. As they turned, Ayana reached out and caught his sleeve, briefly, deliberately. Matthew, she said. He stopped. You do not owe us your life, she said. Do not give it lightly. He held her gaze. I'm not giving it, he replied. I'm choosing where to stand. She released his sleeve, then stand with clear eyes. They returned to the livery without incident, slipping inside as the hoofbeats faded. Matthew barred the door and leaned against it, listening until his heartbeat slowed. Inside, the women settled each in her own way. Ilu whispered a prayer. Tala curled close to Ayana, her earlier fear tempered by resolve. Kiona checked the rifle Matthew handed her, then returned it satisfied. Nokomis sat near the wall, eyes half closed, listening beyond listening. Matthew sat apart, cleaning his hands with a cloth that would never quite be clean. The night pressed on, heavy with possibility. Ayana approached him once more, stopping just short of his space. You made a promise, she said. Yes, Matthew replied. Promises are heard by more than the living, she added. He nodded. I know. Outside the town shifted restless. Somewhere a door opened and closed. Somewhere else a laugh died quickly. Matthew looked at Ayana, at the steadiness she carried like a lantern inside her chest. He felt the pull, not of desire, but of alignment. Two paths crossing, not to merge, but to walk side by side for as long as the road allowed. "If we leave this town," he said quietly, "it won't be tonight." Ayanna nodded. "The dawn will decide." Matthew lay back, eyes on the rafters, listening to the desert breathe. Sleep came slowly, like a careful animal testing the ground. As he drifted, one thought stayed with him, clear and unyielding. Hargrove would not forgive this. And when morning came, the cost of standing would be named. Morning broke with a false gentleness. Sunlight crept into the livery through thin cracks in the walls, painting pale lines across the dirt floor. For a brief moment, the town looked ordinary again. Harmless even. That illusion lasted until Matthew Collins heard the sound of boots stopping just outside the door. Not pacing. Waiting. Matthew rose slowly, every sense sharpening. He glanced toward the women. They were already awake. Kiona sat with her back straight, hands resting on her knees, eyes alert. Nokomis stood near the wall, listening not to the door, but to the spaces around it. Elu whispered something to Tala, her voice steady, calming. Ayanna watched Matthew, reading his face. "Someone's there," Tala murmured. "Yes," Matthew said, "and they want us to know it." A knock came, soft, careful. Matthew, a familiar voice called. "It's me." Matthew frowned. He knew that voice. "Who?" he asked. "Jonah Pierce," the voice replied. "I brought news." Matthew hesitated. Jonah Pierce was a drifter, a man Matthew had shared coffee with more than once in other towns. Not a friend, but not an enemy either. At least he hadn't been. Matthew unbarred the door just enough to see Jonah's face. The man stood alone, hat in hand, eyes darting. "Make it quick," Matthew said. Jonah swallowed. "Hargrove's angry," he said. "Real angry. He's telling folks you're planning something. Says you're stirring up trouble between the town and the tribes." Matthew's jaw tightened. That was always his plan. Jonah shifted his weight. "Sheriff Ridley's trying to slow things down, but Hargrove's got men talking. They say he's going to push for an arrest. Or worse." Ayanna stepped into view behind Matthew. Jonah's eyes flicked to her, then away. "Why tell us?" Matthew asked. Jonah hesitated too long. Because I don't want blood on my hands," Jonah said finally. Matthew studied him, searching for cracks. "You already chose a side by walking here." Jonah flinched. "I didn't choose Hargrove's." Matthew opened the door wider, letting Jonah step inside. The man's gaze flicked to the women again, discomfort written plainly across his face. "They're planning something today," Jonah continued. "I don't know what, but it won't be loud. Hargrove doesn't want another scene." Nokomis spoke quietly. "Quiet harm lasts longer." Jonah swallowed hard. "You should leave. Now. Before noon." Matthew nodded slowly. "Thank you." Jonah exhaled in relief, turning toward the door. "Just be careful." When the door closed behind him, silence settled. Kiona scoffed. "He came to warn us, or to see if we were afraid." Both, Matthew said. "Fear is currency in this town." Ayanna studied the door. "He will speak of us," she said, "even if he believes he helped." "Yes," Matthew replied. "And that's the problem." They moved quickly. Supplies were repacked, water skins checked. Matthew planned a route south, hard country, but clean. He meant to leave before Hargrove could tighten the net. A sudden shout echoed outside, not angry, excited. Matthew froze. He moved to the window and peered out. A wagon stood across the street, one he hadn't seen before. Two of Hargrove's men leaned against it, casual, waiting. And there, speaking animatedly with a small knot of townsfolk, stood Jonah Pierce. Matthew's chest tightened. "He lied?" Tala whispered. "No," Matthew said softly. He convinced himself. Jonah gestured toward the livery, nodding as he spoke. The men by the wagon straightened. Ayanna stepped beside Matthew. "He told them where we are." "Yes," Matthew said, "and that we're planning to run." The sound of boots multiplied, not rushing, coordinating. Kiona reached for Matthew's rifle. "We can't stay." "We won't," Matthew said, "but we won't scatter either." Ayanna met his gaze. "What do you intend?" Truth, Matthew replied. "Out in the open, before they can twist it again." A pounding knock struck the door, hard this time. "Matthew Collins," a voice called. "Sheriff's orders, open up." Matthew exhaled slowly. He looked at the women, at their resolve, their fear, their trust. "I won't let them take you," he said. Ayanna shook her head slightly. "Do not speak as if we are objects." He corrected himself immediately. "I won't let them take us." She nodded. Matthew opened the door. Sheriff Ridley stood there, flanked by two deputies who avoided eye contact. Jonah lingered behind them, face pale. Matthew Ridley said, voice strained. "You're under suspicion of inciting unrest." "On what charge?" Matthew asked. Ridley hesitated, disturbing the peace. Matthew laughed once bitter. "Peace doesn't break this easily unless it was already rotten." Ridley's gaze flicked to the women. "They need to be escorted out of town." "Where?" Ayanna asked calmly. Ridley swallowed. "There's a holding camp west of here." Kiona stiffened. "A cage." "It's temporary," Ridley said quickly. "For their safety." Matthew stepped forward. "You put them there. You hand Hargrove exactly what he wants." Ridley met his eyes, anguish plain. "You think I don't know that Jonah spoke up?" Voice shaking. "They're scared, Sheriff. Folks think Matthew rounded on him. Think what you told them to think Jonah flinched." "I was trying to help by selling fear," Matthew said. The crowd gathered behind the deputies, murmuring. Hargrove was nowhere to be seen, which made Matthew's skin crawl. This was his work executed by others. Ridley rubbed his face. "Matthew, don't make this worse." Ayanna stepped forward. "We will speak," she said. "Now. To all." Ridley shook his head. "It's too late." "No," Ayanna replied. "It is only late when courage fails." Matthew looked at the crowd, at the women on the edges, the men leaning forward, the children pulled back again. He raised his voice. "You want peace," he called. "Then hear us." Not through Hargrove's mouth, through ours. A hush fell, not complete, but enough. Ridley hesitated, then stepped aside. Ayanna lifted her chin. "We spoke of a vow," she said clearly. "A vow to choose freely to live without force. That vow frightened men who profit from fear." Murmurs rippled. "We are not offerings," Kiona added. "We are not prizes." Jonah bowed his head. Ayanna's gaze swept the crowd. "If you send us away in chains, you tell your daughters what you believe they are worth." A woman near the back gasped softly. Hargrove chose that moment to appear, stepping through the crowd with a measured smile. "Very moving," he said, "but speeches don't keep people safe." Matthew felt the trap close. Hargrove's eyes glittered. "Sheriff, do your duty." Ridley looked from Hargrove to the women, to Matthew, and then to the crowd. The decision hovered, trembling. Matthew's heart pounded. He knew this was the betrayal Jonah had warned of, not the man himself, but the town's willingness to let someone else decide for them. If Ridley yielded now, everything would fall apart, and Matthew would have to choose how far he was willing to go. The square held its breath. Sheriff Amos Ridley stood between two futures, and everyone could see it. His badge caught the sun dull and scratched, as if it had been worn thin by too many compromises. Caleb Hargrove waited with a patience. Sharpened by confidence, his men spread just wide enough to remind the town where power usually settled. Matthew Collins felt the old instinct surge, step in front, draw the line, take the blow meant for others. He shifted his weight forward, and Ayanna raised her hand. Not to stop him, to speak before he could. "We will not be escorted," she said. Her voice did not waver. It carried across the square, clean and steady, cutting through the murmurs like a blade through cloth. Ridley blinked. "Miss, we will not be escorted," Ayanna repeated louder now. "We will not be caged for your convenience." Kiona stepped to her side, shoulders squared. "You call it protection," she said. "But protection that requires our silence is only another kind of harm." Elu moved next, her hand still resting on Tala's wrist. "We have walked farther than your fences," she said gently. "We have endured hunger and cold and fear. Do not pretend this town frightens us more than what we have already survived." Nokomis came last, her eyes scanning the crowd. "Listen," she said softly, but somehow everyone did. "Listen not with hunger, listen with memory. Every injustice you excuse today teaches your children how to excuse the next." A hush fell deeper than before. Matthew felt it then, the shift. It was subtle, fragile, but real. The weight of attention moved away from him and settled where it belonged, on the women who had been spoken about, judged, and nearly removed without consent. Hargrove smiled thinly. "This is touching," he said, "but it changes nothing." A woman near the mercantile stepped forward. It was the seamstress again, her hand shaking but her chin lifted. "It changes something," she said. "It changes what my daughter sees." A man beside her scoffed. "Don't be foolish." She turned on him. "Foolish is letting a rich man tell me what's decent." A murmur spread. Another woman spoke, then another. Not loud, not together, but enough to be heard. Matthew watched Ridley's face as it happened. He saw the calculation give way to something older and more dangerous, conscience. Hargrove sensed it too. His smile vanished. "Sheriff," he said sharply, "this is getting out of hand." Ridley swallowed. Maybe it always was. Hargrove stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You let this stand and you'll lose control." Ridley looked at him, eyes tired. "Control of what?" Hargrove hesitated. The crowd leaned in. Ridley turned to Ayanna. "You're asking a town to change itself in a day." Ayanna met his gaze. "No," she said. "We are asking it to stop lying to itself for 1 hour." Silence followed, heavy, instructive. Matthew felt pride rise in him, quiet and fierce. Not pride in himself, but in the moment, rare and dangerous when truth found allies. Hargrove laughed sharp and dismissive. "You think this ends with words?" he asked. "You think courage alone feeds people? Keeps order." Kiona answered him. "Order built on fear starves the soul." Hargrove's eyes flashed. "You don't belong here." Elu tilted her head. "Neither did you once." That landed harder than a threat. Hargrove's jaw tightened. He turned to his men, nodding once. Matthew felt the movement before it happened, the tightening circle the way boots angled inward. He stepped forward instinctively. Ayanna moved with him. "No," she said quietly. "Stand beside us." He did. The sisters spread out, not defensively, but deliberately, each taking a step that claimed space rather than surrendered it. Tala's breath shook once, then steadied as she lifted her chin. She looked young, yes, but not weak. "Enough," Ridley said louder than before. "I won't have this town turned into a threat." Hargrove rounded on him. "You'll regret choosing them." Ridley straightened. "I choose the law." Hargrove laughed. "The law bends." "Not today," Ridley said. The crowd reacted then, some with relief, some with anger. Hargrove's men hesitated, uncertain, without open permission. Hargrove assessed the square, recalculating. Oeti. He had lost momentum. Not the war, but this moment. "Very well," he said at last, voice cold. "Have it your way." He turned his coat, flaring slightly as he walked away. His men followed slower, resentful. The square exhaled. Matthew felt his pulse pounding in his ears. He looked at Ayanna. "That was necessary," she said. Ridley approached them, rubbing his face. "You've made enemies," he said quietly. Ayanna nodded. "We already had them." Ridley looked at Tala, then away. "You can stay the night," he said. "But after that, we will decide our path." Ayanna replied, "As we always have." Ridley hesitated, then nodded. "I'll keep the peace as best I can." As the crowd dispersed slowly, reluctantly, Matthew noticed something else, the way women lingered, exchanging glances, nodding to the sisters with something like recognition. The way a few men looked uneasy, as if a mirror had been held up when they least expected it. They returned to the livery under a sky that had begun to soften toward evening. Inside, the women sat together, the tension finally loosening. Tala let out a breath she'd been holding for hours. Elu smiled at her, small and proud. Kiona leaned back against the wall, eyes closed, savoring the moment like a victory earned through restraint. Matthew sank onto a crate, hands trembling now that the danger had passed. Ayanna sat across from him, studying his face. "You stayed beside us," she said. "I meant what I said," he replied. "I won't speak over you." Ayanna nodded. "Many men promise that." "I know," Matthew said. "That's why I let you speak first." Ayanna's gaze softened, not into romance, but into respect that ran deeper. "That is rarer." Outside the town resumed its sounds, quieter now, thoughtful. Somewhere a door closed gently instead of slamming. Nokomis spoke from the shadows. "Hargrove will not forget this." "No," Matthew agreed. "He'll strike where it's hardest to defend." Kiona opened her eyes. "Then we remain visible." Ayanna nodded. "Silence feeds lies. Light starves them." Matthew looked at the women, at the calm after the storm, and felt something settle in him. Not peace yet, but alignment. The sense that for once he was not running from his past, nor trying to rewrite it alone. Evening deepened. The desert wind brushed the livery's walls, carrying with it the scent of dust and possibility. Ayanna rose. "We should rest," she said. "Tomorrow will ask more of us." Matthew stood as well. "I'll take first watch." She met his gaze. "We will share it." They settled into the night, not unafraid, but unbroken. Outside, far beyond the town's edge, the desert listened, and somewhere in that listening consequences gathered their strength. Night fell heavier than it had any right to. The town quieted too quickly, as if someone had pressed a palm over its mouth. Lanterns dimmed. The saloon's laughter died early, replaced by a brittle stillness that made Matthew Collins uneasy. He had learned to trust that feeling, the sense that danger did not always announce itself with noise. Inside the livery, the women prepared without being told. Elu laid out small bundles water-bread cloth, placing them where each sister could reach without searching. Nokomis positioned herself near the wall where sound traveled best. Kiona checked the door bar twice, then once more for certainty. Tala sat with her back straight, hands folded, eyes open and alert despite the hour. Ayana stood near Matthew, her presence steady as an anchor. "This is the night he tests us," she said quietly. Matthew nodded. "He won't come loud." "No," she agreed. "He wants us afraid before we're harmed." Matthew took first watch, seated near the door with his rifle resting across his knees. He did not intend to fire it, but he would not be caught unready again. Not tonight. Not ever. Hours passed. The livery creaked as wood cooled. Wind threaded through cracks, carrying the smell of dust and old iron. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, once then fell silent. Matthew counted breaths, listened to the rhythm of the town's false sleep. A soft sound reached him, then boots, careful moving where light did not. He raised a hand. Ayana saw it immediately. Kiona tensed. Nokomis leaned toward the wall, eyes half closed. "They're not many," Nokomis whispered. "3, maybe 4. Matthew shifted his weight, lowering his voice. "They'll try the back." As if summoned by the words, a faint scrape sounded near the rear wall, metal against wood testing. Tala's breath caught. Elu squeezed her hand, grounding her without a word. Matthew stood slowly, motioning Ayana to stay back. "No," she said softly, "beside you." He nodded once. The scrape came again, followed by a low murmur, men conferring impatient. Not drunk. Focused. Matthew moved to the rear window and peered out through a narrow gap. Hargrove's men, not Hargrove himself. He was smarter than that. Matthew exhaled. "They're trying to scare us into running. And if we do," Kiona asked. "They'll say we proved them right," Matthew replied. The latch at the back door rattled. Ayana stepped forward, then her voice calm and clear. "We are awake," she said. "You need not pretend." The murmuring outside stopped. For a long moment nothing happened. Then a voice answered, smooth, practiced. "Just checking on our neighbors." From the shadows, Kiona snapped. A chuckle followed. "Didn't want to wake anyone." "You failed?" Ayana replied. Another pause. The men shifted. Matthew could almost feel their frustration. "Sheriff said you could stay the night," the voice said. "We're making sure, that's all." Matthew stepped forward, letting the light catch his face. "Go home," he said. "This doesn't end the way you think." The voice hardened. "You don't get to decide that." "No," Matthew agreed. "You do. Right now." Silence pressed in again, thick and measuring. A stone struck the side of the livery hard enough to thud, not break. Tala flinched. "That's your answer," Kiona called. More stones followed, controlled, deliberate. Not enough to destroy. Enough to warn. Matthew felt the old anger rise, sharp and familiar. He forced it down. Violence was what they wanted. It would justify everything Hargrove had said. Ayana stepped forward, lifting her voice, not shouting, not pleading. "You hide because you know you are wrong," she said. "If you believed your cause was just, you would stand in the light." The stones stopped. A low curse followed. Then footsteps retreated, slow and resentful. Matthew did not relax. "Not yet. Stay ready," he murmured. They waited. Minutes stretched into an hour. The town remained still, the quiet unnatural. Matthew's muscles ached from holding tension, but he did not shift. Just before dawn, another sound reached them, hoofbeats this time unmistakable. Not circling, approaching openly. Matthew frowned. "That's Ridley." Sure enough, the sheriff's voice called from outside, strained but steady. "Matthew, open up." Matthew unbarred the door cautiously. Ridley stood there alone, hat pulled, low eyes shadowed by exhaustion. "You all right?" "Yes," Matthew said. "For now." Ridley nodded, glancing around the square. Hargrove's men were seen near here. "We noticed," Kiona said. Ridley winced. "I chased them off." Ayana studied him. "Why now?" Ridley's jaw tightened. "Because if something happened to you tonight, it wouldn't stay quiet. And Hargrove knows it." Matthew understood. The balance had shifted just enough to make open violence inconvenient. "They'll try again," Ridley said. "Not tonight, but soon." Ayana nodded. "We are not finished either." Ridley hesitated, then looked at Tala. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "for what this town nearly became." Tala met his gaze, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "It almost did," she said. "That matters." Ridley removed his hat, holding it against his chest for a moment longer than necessary. Then he nodded and stepped away, leaving the street to the growing light. Dawn crept in slowly, gray and uncertain. Matthew leaned against the doorframe, fatigue finally catching him. Ayanna stood beside him, watching the horizon soften. "You did not draw your weapon," she said. "I wanted to," Matthew admitted, more than once. "But you didn't," she replied. "That choice matters." He looked at her, really looked at the lines of strength in her face, at the calm she carried, even after a night like this. "I don't want to win by becoming them," he said. She nodded. "Then you won't." Inside, the sisters began to stir with the morning quiet movements, shared glances. Elu smiled faintly at Tala, who returned it tired, but unbroken. Nokomis listened to the dawn as if reading a verdict. Kiona stretched ready for whatever came next. Matthew realized then that this night long and bloodless had changed the town more than any public speech. The lie had been tested in the dark and found wanting. Fear had knocked and been refused entry, but Hargrove would not accept that. As the sun finally cleared the rooftops, Matthew felt the weight of the coming day settle on his shoulders. This had been the longest night on the frontier, and it had ended without blood. That mercy he knew would demand a reckoning. The morning after the long night felt borrowed. Sunlight spread across the town as if nothing had happened, as if stones had not struck walls and men had not whispered threats in the dark. Matthew Collins knew better. He had lived long enough to recognize a calm that existed only to sharpen what followed. He stepped out of the livery just after sunrise. A few townsfolk were already moving about, slow, deliberate eyes flicking toward him and then away. He felt it again, the quiet recalculation, the sense that people were deciding what to believe, now that the lie had been challenged and not immediately rewarded. Ayanna joined him, her presence steady. "This is when truth asks for payment," she said softly. Matthew nodded. "It always does." They walked together toward the courthouse steps, not to speak, but to be seen. The square filled gradually. No crowd this time, just watchers. Men leaning against posts, women lingering in doorways. A handful of children perched where they could see without being seen. Sheriff Ridley emerged from the courthouse, shoulders squared with resolve that had cost him sleep. He met Matthew's gaze and inclined his head, a small acknowledgement that carried weight. Then Caleb Hargrove arrived, not with a flourish, not late. He came early alone, his cane tapping a slow, measured rhythm against the dirt. He stopped a few paces from Matthew and Ayanna, surveying them with an expression that held no smile at all. "Morning," Hargrove said. "Caleb," Matthew replied. Hargrove's eyes flicked to Ayanna. "I hear you had a restless night." "We slept," Ayanna said. "You didn't." Hargrove's mouth twitched. "You mistake caution for fear." "Do I?" she asked. Hargrove turned to the square, lifting his voice just enough. "I'm calling a meeting," he announced. "Now. No speeches, no theatrics, just facts." Ridley stepped forward. "This isn't your court." Hargrove met his gaze. "No. It's the town's." A murmur rippled through the onlookers. People drifted closer, drawn by the promise of resolution. Hargrove raised his cane slightly. "There are accusations," he said, "about lies, about coercion, about intentions. If we're going to move on, we need clarity." Matthew felt the trap forming. "Clarity," Matthew said, "or control?" Hargrove ignored him. "I propose a simple question," he continued. "Do these women intend to stay in this town?" Ayanna answered before Matthew could. "For now." Hargrove nodded as if confirming a suspicion. "And do they accept the town's authority?" "We accept fairness," Ayanna replied. "Authority that demands silence is not authority." Hargrove sighed. "You see the problem. The problem," Matthew said, "is that you keep asking the wrong questions." Hargrove's eyes sharpened. "Do I?" "Yes," Matthew replied. "You're asking what they owe, not what you're willing to guarantee." Ridley stepped in. "That's enough." "This isn't." Hargrove raised a hand. "Let the man speak." Matthew felt the weight of the square settle on him. He did not want this role, but it had chosen him. "You want facts," he said. "Here's one. These women were threatened because someone twisted their words into permission. That someone benefited from the fear." Hargrove's jaw tightened. "Careful." "And here's another," Matthew continued. "There's no law that grants you claim over a person because you want them to be vulnerable." A man near the edge scoffed. "What about safety?" "Safety isn't ownership," Matthew replied, "and it isn't selective." A woman stepped forward, then the seamstress again, hands trembling. "I heard the traitor," she said. "Months ago, he bragged about making trouble. Heads turned. A murmur rose. Hargrove's eyes flicked to her cold. "Are you accusing me of— I'm accusing you of listening?" she said, and smiling. The square stirred. Hargrove laughed once sharp. "This is ridiculous." "Is it?" Ridley asked quietly. Hargrove turned on him. "You'll side with rumors. I'll side with testimony," Ridley replied. "And I'm hearing a lot of it." Another voice spoke up. Then another. Small truths cautiously offered. Not enough to condemn, but enough to corrode certainty. Hargrove assessed the crowd, recalculating again. He had not expected witnesses. He had counted on fear to keep mouths shut. "Very well," he said. "If we're airing grievances, let's be thorough." He turned to Matthew. You've stirred unrest before. Towns left worse after you passed through. You want to pretend this is about virtue, but it's about chaos." Matthew felt the accusation land. He did not deny it. "I've left places broken," he said, "because I stayed silent when it mattered." A hush followed. "I won't do that again," Matthew continued. "If that costs me, so be it." Hargrove smiled thinly. "I move that Matthew Collins be detained, for the safety of the town." The words dropped like a stone into water. Ridley stiffened. "On what grounds?" incitement, Hargrove said. "Disturbing the peace." Matthew felt Ayanna's presence beside him, steady and unyielding. "You arrest him," she said, "and you confirm everything we've said." Ridley hesitated, the weight of the badge pressing into his palm. Hargrove leaned closer. "Do your duty." Ridley looked at Matthew, then at Ayanna, then at the women watching from doorways, at the seamstress who had spoken, at the men who looked suddenly unsure. "No," Ridley said. The word rang out clear and final. Hargrove stared at him. "You'll regret this," maybe Ridley replied, "but not today." Hargrove's eyes flicked back to Matthew. "This isn't over." Matthew met his gaze. "I know." Hargrove turned away, his cane striking the ground harder now. His men gathered at a distance, resentment simmering. The square exhaled relief mixed with dread. Ayanna touched Matthew's arm lightly. "You paid," she said. He nodded, and the balance shifted. Ridley approached, voice low. "You should leave town," he said to Matthew. "Soon." Matthew understood. "I will." "And them?" Ridley asked, glancing toward the women. "They'll decide." Matthew replied. Ayanna met Ridley's gaze. "We will not be rushed," she said, "but we will not linger to satisfy your fear." Ridley nodded. "Fair." As the crowd dispersed, Matthew felt the cost settle into his bones, not punishment, but consequence. He had named the truth aloud. He had refused the lie. The price was motion, always motion. Later, as the sun climbed higher, Matthew packed his saddle. Ayanna stood nearby, watching the town with a calm that had not wavered. "They will watch you leave," she said. "Yes," Matthew replied, "and they'll remember why." She studied him. "You could stay." He shook his head. "Not yet." Hargrove would use it. Ayanna nodded, understanding, without bitterness. "Paths diverge." "Sometimes," Matthew said. "Sometimes they run alongside longer than expected." She met his gaze, something unspoken passing between them. Respect alignment. The promise of a future not owned by this moment. As Matthew swung into the saddle, a woman waved from a doorway. Another nodded. Small gestures. Quiet shifts. The price of truth had been paid. Not in blood, in courage, in departure. And as Matthew rode toward the edge of town, he knew the story was not finished, only changed. The town did not wake the way it used to. Matthew Collins noticed it the moment he reined his horse near the outskirts and looked back. There was movement. Yes, doors, opening carts, rolling, voices calling. But the rhythm had changed. Where there had been confidence, there was now caution. Where there had been noise, there was listening. He dismounted and waited. Ayanna and her sisters emerged from the livery a short while later, carrying what little they owned. They did not hurry. They did not linger. They moved with the quiet authority of people who had learned the cost of both. Matthew stepped forward. "You didn't have to walk out with me," he said. Ayanna met his gaze. "We are not sending you away," she replied. "We are choosing how we stand." The others formed a loose line beside her. Kiona's eyes scanned the street, sharp as ever. Nokomis listened to the space between sounds. Elu kept Tala close, her presence a steadying warmth. Tala looked back once, then forward again, chin lifted. The square watched them. A woman sweeping her stoop paused and nodded. The seamstress stood in her doorway, hands folded, expression thoughtful. A man near the saloon turned away when Ayanna's gaze met his, ashamed perhaps, or simply unwilling to be seen. Sheriff Ridley appeared near the courthouse steps. He did not approach. He did not stop them. He simply removed his hat and held it against his chest until they passed. It was not forgiveness. It was acknowledgement. Matthew felt something ease in his chest. They walked beyond the last buildings where the land opened, and the town's weight fell away. The desert stretched before them, pale and patient, as if it had been waiting for this exact moment to resume its ancient work. Matthew broke the silence. Ridley told me Hargrove won't push openly for a while. Ayanna nodded. Men like him retreat when the light is too bright. But they don't stop, Kiona said. No. Matthew agreed. They wait. They reached a rise where the town fell fully behind them. Matthew set his pack down and loosened his horse's reins. The wind moved across the grass, soft and deliberate. This is where I turn, he said. Ayanna studied the horizon. So soon. For now, Matthew replied, I'll draw attention away from you. That's the safest thing I can do. Elu smiled faintly. Safety is rarely one thing. Tala looked up at him. Will you come back? Matthew considered the question. If the road allows it, he said honestly. Ayanna stepped closer. You have paid your debt to this place, she said. You owe it nothing more. I didn't do this for the town, Matthew replied. She met his gaze. I know. For a moment, none of them spoke. The wind carried the sound of distant hooves, someone passing far off, unimportant. The sky widened. Ayanna reached into her bundle and drew out the strip of worn leather Matthew had seen before, the one she twisted when thinking. She held it between her fingers, then extended it toward him. This is not a claim, she said. It is a reminder. Matthew hesitated. I don't want to take something sacred. You won't, she replied. It will only be with you for as long as you need it. He accepted it carefully, the leather warm from her hand. What does it remind me of? That we chose, she said. All of us. Kiona watched him closely. Do not mistake this, she said. We do not belong to you. Matthew met her gaze. I know. And you are not our savior, she continued. I know that too, Matthew said. You saved yourselves. Kiona nodded, once satisfied. Nokomis stepped forward. Paths cross for reasons, she said quietly. Not all of them end together. Matthew smiled faintly. I've learned that. They shared water. They adjusted packs. Practical things done slowly to soften the weight of departure. At last, Ayanna stepped back. Go, she said, before the town remembers how to be hungry. Matthew mounted his horse. He looked at each of them in turn, committing the moment to memory, not as a wound, but as a proof. I'll keep moving, he said, but I won't forget where I stood. Ayanna lifted her chin. Neither will we. He turned his horse, then paused. If Hargrove tries again, Ayanna smiled, calm and fierce. Then he will find us ready. Matthew nodded. He rode. The desert took him quickly, the town shrinking behind him until it was only a smudge of wood and dust against the wide land. As the miles passed, he felt the familiar pull to keep going, to outrun memory. But this time, the pull was gentler. He did not need to erase what he carried. He needed only to keep it true. Hours later, as the sun dipped and the air cooled, Matthew stopped at a low bluff and looked back one last time. The town was gone from sight. The horizon held only land and sky. He touched the strip of leather at his wrist. Behind him, unseen choices continued to ripple. Women would speak more carefully now and more boldly. Men would weigh their words, uncertain of how much the old lies could bear. Hargrove would wait, nursing grievance into strategy. Matthew felt no triumph, only readiness. Night gathered. He made camp beneath a sky bright with stars and slept without dreams for the first time in longer than he could remember. At dawn, far from the town, Matthew woke to a sound that pulled him upright. Hoofbeats. He reached for his rifle, then froze. A lone rider approached from the east, dust rising behind them. Not Hargrove's men, not a patrol. As the rider drew closer, Matthew saw the familiar posture, the steady seat, the way the horse moved, as if guided by trust rather than force. Ayanna reined in a few paces away. She dismounted without haste. We decided, she said simply. Matthew's heart thudded, not with surprise, but recognition. Decided what? That some paths, she replied, do not end when the town thinks they should. She glanced toward the open desert. Only when we choose. The wind lifted between them, carrying dust and possibility. And Matthew knew the storm had passed, but the journey had just begun. Matthew Collins did not ask why Ayanna had come alone. He understood without words that the answer was not simple, and that simplicity had never been promised to either of them. They stood facing one another beneath a sky just beginning to pale with morning, the desert stretching wide and honest in every direction. Ayana's horse shifted its weight, patient, as if accustomed to waiting for decisions that mattered. "We spoke through the night," Ayana said. "All 5 of us." Matthew nodded. He did not interrupt. "Tala wanted to go east," she continued. "She is curious. She wants schools, places where questions are welcomed." Matthew smiled faintly. "She'll find them." "Elu will go with her," Ayana said. "She listens for gentler roads." "And Kiona?" Matthew asked. Ayana's mouth curved with something like pride. "Kiona will head south with Nokomis. There are camps that need strong hands and sharper eyes. They will be safe together." Matthew exhaled slowly, feeling the shape of the future settle. "And you," Ayana looked past him toward the long road he had been following for years without naming it. "I will walk a while," she said. "Not to escape, to learn." "With me?" Matthew asked, careful. "Yes," she replied. "With you." The word did not bind them. It opened space. They made camp together that morning, not because they were tired, but because neither felt the need to rush. Matthew built the fire while Ayana gathered water. They worked side by side, wordless, the ease between them earned rather than assumed. As the sun rose, they spoke of practical things, routes that avoided towns where Hargrove's influence still reached, springs that ran even in drought, the habits of men who mistook quiet for weakness, the signs of weather that saved lives if read early enough. They did not speak of love. They spoke of trust. Later as they ate, Matthew said, "If you change your mind," Ayana shook her head gently. "I will tell you. I will not disappear." "That's all I ask," Matthew said. "It is more than many men ask," she replied. They broke camp by mid-morning. Matthew rode, Ayana walked at first, then mounted when the ground turned rough. The desert unfolded in layers rock, giving way to grass to scrub to open plain. The land did not hurry them. By afternoon, they encountered a small trading post near a dry wash. Matthew slowed his horse. "We can pass it," he said, "or we can stop." Ayana studied the place, the 2 rough buildings, the man repairing a fence, the woman watching from a doorway. No fear in her eyes, only assessment. "We stop," she said. Briefly, they did. The woman greeted them without suspicion, offering water. Matthew watched the exchange the way Ayana spoke plainly and was met in kind. No lies, no performances. Just 2 people measuring one another and finding no cause for harm. As they left, Ayana said, "This is how it begins." Matthew glanced at her. "How what begins?" "A different way," she replied. They rode on. That night they camped beneath a stand of cottonwoods. The fire burned low. Stars crowded the sky. Matthew lay back, hands folded behind his head, listening to the wind move through leaves. Ayana sat nearby, repairing a strap with careful stitches. "You do not speak much at night," she said. "I've learned the dark doesn't need help," Matthew replied. She smiled faintly. "You learned that the hard way." "Yes," he said, "but I learned it." Silence settled, comfortable, unforced. In the days that followed, they fell into a rhythm. Matthew scouted ahead. Ayana chose camps. When danger appeared, riders on the horizon signs of a storm, they decided together. There were no orders, no debts, only agreements. They met travelers and passed through places that would have once turned hostile. Sometimes they were welcomed, sometimes not. In either case, they did not linger where respect did not live. On the 7th day, they reached a low ridge overlooking a river that cut clean and blue through the land. Ayana stopped her horse. "This is where I will leave you," she said. Matthew's chest tightened, but he did not argue. For how long, Ayana considered. Long enough to know myself better. Long enough to choose again. Matthew nodded. "I'll wait." She dismounted, stepping close, not touching him, but close enough that the space felt intentional. "You do not wait," she said gently. "You live. If our paths cross again, it will be because we chose it, not because one of us stayed still." Matthew met her gaze steady. "That's fair." She reached out, then touching his wrist where the leather strip rested. "Remember," she said. "Choice." "I will," Matthew replied. They parted without ceremony. Matthew rode west as the river glittered below. He did not look back until the ridge curved away and the land reclaimed its quiet. Weeks passed. Matthew worked when he could, mending fences, escorting wagons, guiding lost travelers to water. He spoke less and listened more. He found that people noticed. Not all kindness was returned. Enough was. Sometimes at night, he thought of Ayanna not as a promise deferred, but as a truth encountered. He carried that truth lightly, the way one carries a compass rather than a map. One evening, near a stand of mesquite, he found tracks he recognized, not hers alone, but a pair. Two riders moving with purpose, not haste. He followed. At dusk, he saw smoke rising from a camp he had not expected to find so soon. Ayanna looked up as he approached, her expression calm, unsurprised. "We decided again," she said, as if continuing a conversation paused rather than ended. Matthew smiled, a quiet, steady thing. "So did I." They shared a meal. They shared news. They shared the understanding that this road would not be easy and that ease had never been the measure of a life well chosen. In the distance, thunder murmured, not a threat, but a reminder that the land, like truth, answered only to itself. They rose at dawn and rode together, not toward a town that demanded silence, but toward a horizon that asked only honesty. And in that choosing again and again, they found what neither had been promised, not safety without risk, not love without patience, but dignity that endured. This story reminds us that dignity is not something granted by others. It is something we choose to protect even when the cost is high. In a world that often rewards silence and punishes those who speak inconvenient truths, courage does not always look like shouting or fighting. Sometimes it looks like standing still, like listening, like refusing to let lies define who we are. Matthew did not save these women. They saved themselves by choosing honesty over fear, unity over isolation, and self-respect over survival at any price. Their journey teaches us that real strength grows quietly through choices made day after day, even when no one is watching, and that healing does not come from forgetting the past, but from facing it without surrendering our values. If this story moved, you take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments. What part resonated with you the most, and why? And if you enjoy cinematic stories with heart meaning and timeless lessons, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps keep these stories alive, and the journey continues with you.